Before we begin this super fun episode, we want to introduce you to an awesome new podcast from one of our past guests, the multiracial superstar, Sharon Mariguez. Peace, Planks, and Prana is dedicated to the yoga experience for students, teachers, and anyone curious about connecting body, breath, and mind. Hosts Melissa Payne Bradley and Sharon Naris Mariguez explore yoga's physical, energetic, and cultural aspects. Peace represents unity and community, Planks represents the physical practice, and Prana represents the life force connecting us all. Topics include navigating our relationship with our bodies, finding your voice as a teacher, and maintaining a gratitude practice, and so many more awesome topics. Find Peace, Planks, and Prana on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Go check it out today and subscribe.
My parents ended up, they separated when I was fairly young. And so I sort of lived different lives with each of them. With my mother, we talked a lot about her being Black and what that meant for her and what it meant for us. So I had a lot of context for that part of my identity. And I also grew up with her more than I grew up with my father after they separated.
Yeah.
So I really identified with being Black or being a mixed race Black person. And my dad, we never really talked about it because it was very common for him to use terms that he felt were endearing, like, you know, I was always negrita, and I was always like, while also simultaneously he would sometimes say things that were fairly racist and anti-Black.
Sure.
So I remember sort of as a really little person trying to navigate and like grapple with those things, not having a lot of information. And, you know, I grew up in the early 2000s and, we just didn't talk about race the same way we do now.
Welcome to episode 26 of the Multiracialverse podcast. I am your host, Antonio Fernandez. Today, we're joined by the intuitive, empathetic, and inspiring Chiany Dri, a multiracial Black Latina educator and changemaker from Los Angeles. Chiany's passion for equity and justice has shaped over a decade of advocacy for Black and Brown communities across Southern and Central California. From leading transformative DEI initiatives to co-founding Juneteenth Santa Barbara, Chiany has made it her mission to create spaces where liberation, belonging, and joy thrive. In this conversation, we explore her groundbreaking work in anti-racism education, her fight for justice and returning stolen land to Black descendants, and her unwavering dedication to trauma-informed practices. As the founder of the Inclusion School, Chiany continues to guide communities in building inclusive, equitable environments where everyone is seen, heard, and valued. This episode is a powerful journey into the intersection of identity, motherhood, and social change. Let's dive into this impactful conversation with Chiany Dri. Hello, Chiany. Welcome to the Multiracialverse. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for making time. I know you have a busy life with work, family, and yeah, like sometimes these things come up quick, and you know, I'm a true believer in the universe kind of puts us where we need to be at the time where we need to learn. And I know that you have a lot of knowledge and information and life experiences that will be awesome to listen to and awesome to pass on to our guests. With that, let's start with your background. Let's learn a little about your family, where you were born, and your background.
Yeah, I mean, I currently live in Los Angeles, but I was also born and raised here. I was born in Pasadena, which is a little sort of suburb of LA, and in my family, my mom's family has been here since the early 1900s, so I have a lot of deeply rooted sense of self here in Los Angeles and in this part of California. But my father is from Argentina, so he immigrated to the U.S. when he was 18 from Argentina, and my mom's African American, so her family's also been in the U.S. as descendants of enslaved folks for hundreds of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And is your father, is he from Argentina, born and raised there, and immigrated to the U.S., did you say?
Yes, yeah, born and raised there, and his parents were born and raised there, so that is his home. Yeah.
And what brought your mom's family to that area in the early 1900s? That seems like forever ago. I mean, it is, yeah.
It is, yeah. I mean, it was sort of part of a first wave migration of Black folks from the South seeking opportunity in the West. You know, it was like this whole, I mean, there's a lot of people across the U.S. seeking opportunity in the West. But my mom's family was one of those groups of people who came over. And actually, we, in 1916, purchased some land here in Los Angeles, and we still own it to this day. So it's very cool to, as I've gotten older, to get a better sense of what that history really means and the weight of it for me.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that's awesome. That's something to be totally proud of, because I know that, you know, there was just recently this beach in Manhattan where they had that, where they finally, the city turned it back over to the families that owned it, that ran off of it. Yeah.
It was Bruce's beach. And actually, my
Bruce's,
family,
sorry.
No, yeah, my family bought property there because they were friends with the Bruce family.
Wow.
And so we were one of those very first Black families who bought property there. And it just happens to be that we were one of the only, if not the only, Black family that was allowed to keep our property. So wow. I actually was part of the work that returned the land back to the Bruce family. All the legislative work, I got to work on that, and it was a really cool full circle feeling project for me. So also really proud of that. But yeah, there's a lot of history in LA around land being taken from Black communities and Black families to restructure the way LA looks. And so it's a really interesting history to dig into.
Wow, that's so awesome. Congratulations on that work too. That's so, I'm getting goosebumps. That's amazing. So your parents, when did they meet? Like in what era did they meet?
So my parents met in the 90s, the late 90s. My mother was a flight attendant, and she was doing domestic flights from LA to Miami every weekend. And she met my dad at a club in South Beach, Miami, dancing salsa. My mom loved to dance salsa, and she also she learned to speak Spanish fluently. She had lived in Mexico for some years. So she and my dad met on the dance floor at Mango's, if anyone's familiar with Mango's on South Beach. And that's where the story began for them. But I always thought that was such a funny story. And I actually went to Miami like some years ago, and I was there, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where my parents met. It's so weird. But yeah, that was sort of their little love story.
Oh, that's great. And it sounds like your mom had an affinity towards the Latin culture, at least definitely probably a lot of exposure in growing up. What part of LA was she growing up in when they moved here, after they had moved here?
Yeah, well, my mom actually grew up in a pretty affluent area of LA. My mom's family had, done pretty well for themselves. My grandfather was a Superior Court judge. My grandmother had been doing sort of like design, architecture stuff. So they were one of very few Black families who were doing very well for themselves at that time. So my mom actually grew up in the Pacific Palisades, which is sort of by the beach. Yeah. But my mom always she always did really love and have an affinity for Latin American culture. Like I said, she lived in Mexico for a few years, and she actually was a professional dancer and danced flamenco and salsa professionally. So she was just like always really drawn to that. And my mom's very silly, and growing up, she had a lot of friends who were in the salsa sort of, group and like communities. And she would always say like, oh yes, I'm Afro-Cuban. And she could pass as that. But I always thought it was so funny, because I was like, Mom, don't embarrass me. You know that you're not. But she definitely always really loved those aspects of Latin American culture.
Oh, that's awesome. And your dad, did he grow up, when he immigrated, he came to the LA area too?
When he immigrated, I believe he actually first was in sort of the East Coast, like Miami area.
Oh, that's right. You said, I apologize.
Yeah, then he did move to Los Angeles at some point, and he had some friends of family here and other things going on here. So he actually lived in Los Angeles for the majority of the time that he lived in the U.S.
Oh, right on. And so your parents' love story culminates and in the 90s here in LA, and you have brothers and sisters also?
I have a brother who's a year and a half younger than I am.
Okay, so you were the first child to come along in the 90s. Yeah. And so what was your childhood like with this mixed race marriage? Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, Spanish was my first language. Both of my parents, spoke it fluently. And because my mom was a flight attendant, we traveled to Argentina when I was about 3 months old so that I could be baptized Catholic, of course.
Oh, wow.
And there are all these wonderful stories about me being baptized, and according to someone in this church, they thought that I had mal de ojo, which was sort of like a, I was cursed in a sense.
Yeah.
So they had to do this big ceremony to, I guess, take the curse off of me. It was there's this whole story in the background.
Wow.
And my family, my mom has always been into a lot of different, she was really into Santeria for a long time. And she was part of a Santeria, subgroup in Brazil. She, was initiated into, my mom, you should go talk to my mom. She has stories also of just...
Yeah, it sounds like it. She sounds awesome.
But that was a lot of the culture I got brought up in as well. So I spent a lot of time, in botanicas, talking with my mom about the meanings of different herbs and different things. Even though it wasn't really her culture, she totally took it on. And so it was a big part of how I grew up. And my dad, too. I would travel to Argentina every few years to see our family there. And that was, a big part of my experience. I'll never forget sort of being there. It might have been 8 or 9. And it was the first time I ever had a crush on anyone. And it was this guy working at my family owns a nursery in Rosario in Argentina. And they had some guy working there. And I was in love with him. But I also always remember feeling like the odd one out because I was always the brown-skinned kid in my family, especially my Argentinian family, who are certainly Spanish, Italian, mixed people. Yeah. So there was always also a sense of, when I looked at pictures of me and my family, it was always the one who kind of stood out, and that was noticeable for me. I remember knowing that very early on in my life.
Yeah, and did you, how'd that make you feel? And did you talk to your parents about it? What was did they have insight into saying, because a lot of times we're still, I think, moving culturally towards where parents are talking to their children more about things just in general. So, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about it that much. My parents ended up, they separated when I was fairly young. And so I sort of lived different lives with each of them. With my mother, we talked a lot about her being Black and what that meant for her and what it meant for us. So I had a lot of context for that part of my identity. And I also grew up with her more than I grew up with my father after they separated.
Yeah.
So I really identified with being Black or being a mixed race Black person. And my dad, we never really talked about it because it was very common for him to use terms that he felt were endearing, I was always negrita, and I was always while also simultaneously he would sometimes say things that were fairly racist and anti-Black.
Sure.
So I remember sort of as a really little person trying to navigate and grapple with those things, not having a lot of information. And, I grew up in the early 2000s and, we just didn't talk about race the same way we do now. There wasn't, my 12-year-old daughter knows a lot about race. There's a lot of language for it, right? And I just didn't have that language growing up. Even though my mom talked to me about her racial experiences, we didn't talk about it in the sense of how I might be experiencing living sort of in the in-between of racial ethnic experiences. It just wasn't a huge part of our conversations.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really difficult. And it's interesting how the impact of that is so compounded by all these different things, and sometimes we don't even realize that until we're older. You know what I'm saying? We usually don't, because as a child, it's, as you said, it's hard to understand how complex it really is. So did you spend time with your mom's family a lot too, as well as going down to Argentina even when your parents split?
Yeah, I would say the majority of my childhood I was raised by my mother and her parents, so my grandparents. And then I would sometimes see my dad, and we would sometimes travel to Argentina. And so it was sort of like that. I didn't get to have as much time with my dad, and he actually ended up moving back to Argentina when I was about 13, and he's been there since. So, so there has been some fracturing in that sort of in those pieces of my identity, where I have a lot of memory of our foods, our the specific dialect of Spanish, right? And the very sort of culturally specific things to being from Argentina. But there's always been sort of a fracture between I never really got to continue being fluent as a Spanish speaker. And Argentines have a very specific, they're very specific. I'll just put it that way. So I never felt like I quite fit in. Because I never really got to learn like the customs and the ways that people were and what was normal. So there had always been a sense of some fracturing there for me.
And I didn't get to ask, but just to, did your parents talk about early on in their relationship issues with either side having a problem with them dating outside of their race?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
On my dad's side, certainly they were very upset that he was going to marry somebody who was Black, somebody who was African American or of African descent.
Yeah.
That was a big, big deal. I remember my mom had shared that with me when I got older, just like how painful that really was for her and how much she experienced and just how terrible that was.
Yeah.
And on my mom's side, it wasn't so much racial, but it was socioeconomic. They were like, we don't want you marrying this person who doesn't have a college degree, who doesn't live in the same socioeconomic class as we do. After all that we've done and endured to be where we are, how could you marry someone who would, level you down? That was sort of their mentality or thinking.
Wow.
So there was on both ends certainly some pain points with the cultural and identity pieces.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And how did this affect your childhood? Like when you were in school, how did you identify in school? I know we have way more, like you said, you and your 12-year-old have, conversations where there's way more words now that we can use.
Yeah.
But what was growing up, middle school like for you as far as, I guess a young Black girl, right? Because you were living primarily with your mother.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how I saw myself, probably until, I wouldn't have even thought of myself not presenting as Black or not none of that occurred to me until I was in middle school, which is quite a transformative time for many of us.
Yeah. And
it was the first time that I came up against some of the racialized ideas of who people are based on what they look like and how they sound, what they eat, all those different things. And it occurred to me, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't look Black to other people. People don't think that it was like a really big moment for me. I'll never forget. But sort of in the same vein, I think when people did realize that that's how I identified, it gave them a lot of ammunition to sort of be racist, experiment with racism, I should say, because for we're all kids and we're all repeating or experimenting at that time in our lives. But we certainly had a really challenging middle school experience, specifically related to race and identity. And I think for the majority of my middle school experience was called everything outside of my name that related to sort of racial slurs about Black people. And also a lot of people think I'm Middle Eastern, so I get a lot of that too. It's post 9/11 at this point. Yeah. So, there's a lot of heavy influence there as well. And I was really carrying the burden of a lot of that at that time.
Wow. So sorry you had to go through all that. That's just so tough, man. Kids are, especially that middle school age, is just really, really tough.
Yeah.
And did you have anyone you could turn to? It sounds like you said your mother didn't really talk about it back then. Sounds like you've had discussions with her about these things too, probably also because now you're doing work in this area, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But do you remember having representation of someone who you felt connected to at school, or even just another friend that was mixed or multiracial or other that you might have connected with?
Yeah, I had a school counselor, of course. I think a lot of middle schoolers probably still have that. Yeah. But my school counselor, when I brought some of these issues to her, did not take it as seriously as I had hoped. And I remember that being very disappointing for me. I was the kind of... This should have told everyone who I was going to be one day, but what I did was I decided to create a petition to get my counselor fired because I thought she wasn't taking my racialized issues, serious enough. And I ended up getting suspended for 2 weeks because of it.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I think actually my
And this was where? This was in Pasadena
this
area?
was actually in Manhattan Beach. So at that by that time we were living in Manhattan Beach where my family's original property had been. And even though we are probably some of the longest standing, residents there in terms of our family, we never were treated like we belonged there. And to this day, I would say people who look like me or who present more Black than I do have that same experience in a lot of ways. Yeah. So I think early on the messaging was really from adults who I was told I could trust and lean on. Was that this isn't really a big deal. You're being too sensitive. That's not racism. Whatever the messaging was, that's what I internalized. So I did lean a lot on my friends during that time. And I made some really great friends with other people who were mixed race and did have those really similar experiences. And I'm still friends with a lot of those people today. So, it was so important and critical at that time that it actually developed really long-term sustaining friendships and relationships.
Did you have, Manhattan Beach area probably at the time as it is still probably majority white, upper class. What did your friend group look like then when you were in middle school and grade? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in middle school I really did seek out people who looked like me, and it, when I actually learned or dug a little deeper, a lot of these people or kids didn't actually live in Manhattan Beach, but perhaps somehow were able to make an agreement with the school district to be there. And then, of course, when I moved into high school, where kids were coming from different parts of the South Bay area. And there were a lot more students of color coming in who also didn't live in Manhattan Beach. I was also finding myself gravitating toward those groups of people. So living in Manhattan Beach, most of my friends were not actually residents there or living there.
Yeah. It seems like, kind of interestingly enough, that kind of fits the feeling we get is multiracial people, we don't fit in, and then the outsiders are like the people who we fit in with, it's tough. I'm sorry that was your experience. Did you have a place at all throughout school, in high school, where you feel like, okay, wait a second, I found my peeps or I found like resource groups or like they call the student groups, at all while you were in high school?
So, no, we didn't have, at that time, there wasn't even a concept of like a Black student union or anything for, outside of like student government. But where I found refuge in middle school and in high school was actually in our choir class.
Oh, awesome.
Where I did find there were a lot of other kids of color kind of joining there to sing together and do that. So I ended up being really heavily involved in singing and music, which sort of propelled me. I went to 2 different high schools. My last couple of years of high school, I went to a performing arts school. And so it sort of really shaped my expression, how I was able to cope and sort of create a narrative for my experience. And moving that into sort of the arts and performance.
Oh, that's great. Was it more diverse, the performing arts school?
No, it was not.
Yeah.
It was not. It was a private school, so it was certainly for those who could afford something like that. But it did open a lot of doors in terms of seeing myself reflected. There was a lot of emphasis on musicians of color and their stories and their journeys, and I would really latch on to those stories and try and sort of, like, when you're just creating your own identity at that time, so I was trying to figure out, who could I look to create that identity for myself. So it was a really good experience for me and was really helpful. And I had a lot of feelings about being a mixed race kid. I had a lot of pain and a lot of, experiences and emotions I didn't have the language to express at that time. So it's all just living inside me. And so music gave me an avenue to express those experiences and to put words to them in a way that was really healing for me.
Wow. And did you at any point during that time say, you know what, I just need to fit in regardless. I'm mixed race, I'm darker skin. Like, I just need to like try to be like the white people and fit in. Like, that just could make life much easier? Or was it a matter of like, no, I'm just not going to do that. That's like not who I am.
I think I can say confidently that for all of my life, I have not been interested in fitting in. And for better or for worse, I have always,
that's awesome. That's
I've always
awesome.
been true to myself. So it was never appealing for me in overt ways, at least, to fit in with other white kids or within my my very white community of Manhattan Beach, for example. I would say there were other internalized things that I maybe, internalized as what's normal or beautiful or right or whatever, smart.
Yeah.
But I've always been someone who asks too many questions, says too many things, and I'm still like that to this day. So I've never been able to sort of shape shift in that way.
Yeah. And do you think what you just mentioned has also, there's the impact of gender on, you ask too many questions, or be seen not heard, that's also part of the complexity of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where it becomes very intersectional, right? It's like I'm a person of color. It's still the idea, like, you can't be seen, be quiet, be small, be submissive to this dominant culture. But then I'm a woman at the same time, which is, adds another layer of that being part of the expectation of who I am. So I think, aside from never feeling like I fit in as, like within the racial constructs of my world, I also was just never able to be like the quiet, like small, whatever, like girl that I think people really wanted me to be. They really wanted me to like stop causing problems, stop asking questions about this. I was a class clown in middle school and high school. I'm still kind of a class clown, but I actually have made it work for me. But, there was not a lot of, it was like, don't be funny, like, don't get attention, all of those things. It's who I am. And so as an adult, I'm able to, I think, accept it in a different way. But it was hard to navigate those things as a kid, to never feel like I was enough and also too much all at the same time.
Yeah. And it sounds like, did your mom, I love how you called her earlier. She said, my mom's silly, it's such an endearing term. Do you think your mom, she nurtured that, or was she at any one time saying, hey, you gotta remember, where we're at, or other things?
No, my mom was very, very determined to raise kids who would question authority and who would self-express. I remember her being very clear about that with me as I was growing up, that was something she really desired for us. That we would never be afraid to ask questions, to question authority, and that we could express ourselves freely. So I think a lot of, my mom was also of course, like a single mom. So there's a lot, even thinking about the things my mom faced as a single mom. I remember she had a nose ring when I was little, and I remember looking at her and going, can you take that out? The other moms don't have that. But my mom was also very much like, someone who wasn't going to compromise or negotiate pieces of herself to fit in with this sort of greater dominant culture. So I'm sure I've probably gained some of those traits from being her daughter.
I love that. I'm going to ask you something about something you touched on a little bit about when, one of the questions I was going to ask was kind of like, what was that one experience that has kind of propelled you towards the work you're doing that maybe happened when you were younger? And you mentioned getting this petition to get this person fired. Kind of just jumping a little bit forward, and then we'll go into your work, is I'm interested in what you could lend as far as wisdom or advice, suggestions to not only adults, but adults in professional spaces, because you probably do this in your inclusion work, but in believing the story of children, it's kind of just validating that experience, which, a lot of times we just invalidate children's experiences, period. Yeah. But in this space, it's like so much more. So what type of suggestions would you give parents or professionals, whether it's school professionals, teachers, or others, when a child of color comes to them and says, these things are going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious, right, is believe them when they say it, right?
Yes.
But I think beyond that, there needs to be, I think it takes a lot of courage for a young person to tell a grown-up something like that. And how we respond is going to potentially shape the way that they self-advocate for the rest of their lives. And I would want for any young person of color, any young kid of color, to know that it's okay to self-advocate and to feel comfortable and confident in self-advocating. So I think the way we respond as adults really can shape that. So for example, I can even share like a story from me and my daughter who...
Yeah, go ahead.
My daughter's obviously all of me, but she's also, her dad's Persian and from a country called Tajikistan. So that's a very specific culture there too.
Yeah.
And she's really currently struggling with who she is in her own racialized or ethnic identity. We've had a lot of conversations about it, but most recently she had shared a story with her class. I guess the teacher asked a question like, share something interesting about yourself or your family. And she shared something about my mom's family, about my grandfather. Yeah. And it had to do with him being a Black man. And the teacher looked at her and said, "You're trying too hard to be Black, essentially. You're trying too hard.
Wow.
Try another fact, essentially."
Wow.
And it really hurt her. And all the kids laughed and everyone said, yeah, she's wannabe, she's, whatever. And it really hurt her because she's also just trying to figure out who she is in this world. And she's really proud of her racial identities, all of them. So I think, when I came to the school to address that, it was very much like, I believe what my daughter is telling me. You need to look into this. And I wanted my daughter to see that I believe her, I'm there, and I'm going to model what it looks like to advocate for oneself and for the people we love. And so I think that's really important because sometimes in these systems, especially if we have our own trauma around how we've experienced our race or ethnicity being sort of targeted in schools or in communities, we sometimes feel maybe scared to engage in that conflict.
Yeah.
There might be reasons we don't want to go there with the white people at school or whatever it is, but it's really important that we show our young people what it looks like to stand up for ourselves in ways that are obviously respectful and all of that. But I don't ever want to tone police somebody. I don't ever want to say, because you look this way, you shouldn't respond this way. We all have a right to protect ourselves and to advocate for ourselves. So I would want my kids to see that. I would want other people's kids to see that and know that someone's there to protect them and that they also have the tools to protect themselves.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sorry your daughter had to experience that. It's just.
Yeah, I am reliving the trauma of middle school all over again.
Yeah, middle school. I'm sorry that's happening, and it's tough because the bureaucracy of school districts is really binding in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I could talk to you on so many different things, your life and being a parent to multiracial kids. Question for you, I'm going to ask you about being a parent to a multiracial kid and being a multiracial individual is, do you see a parent-led education for the child, meaning you educate your child on their heritage, the ethnicities, their backgrounds, or do you feel that it's more of a child-led, a child, something comes up and you're reactive, or the child, when they're curious, is when it's time to do it? What has worked for you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I will say because of who I am and the work I do, I have done a lot of educating my kids. I think some years ago when my daughter was in second grade, she, during Thanksgiving, she went to school and they read some book about pilgrims and I think she said, well, my mom told me that this is not the true history, blah, blah, blah. So my kids they've already been primed in a lot of ways. We have these conversations at home. I'm really intentional about that with them. And I'm intentional about them knowing who they are too and their background and history. So that's always been important for me as a parent to prepare them in that way. But I also think there's a lot of value to, my kids having their own curiosities and being able to express them, and then for me to be able to meet them there. I've certainly had moments, though, where I've been triggered a little bit by the questions my kids ask me. So it's also, for me as an adult, to know how to regulate myself when things do come up that feel that land weird for me or that bring up something for me that I experienced. So I think it requires a lot of work on the part of adults to be ready to respond. So it's not reactive, right? So that we're really sort of able to meet kids where they are and help them.
When did your work on yourself start? Because I think that's something that we probably don't talk about enough, is that, it's complex being multiracial, and the complexities of it definitely, depending on where you grow up, or who you're around, or other things, add to that. And when did you start working on healing some of the traumas from what you experienced as a child being multiracial? And what are some suggestions that you might have for people to work on that trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't start really even understanding my experiences until I went to college. So I remember my first class I ever took was called Racism in America. And it blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been dealing with my whole life. So I remember that being just like a huge moment for me. And from there, I think the thought for me though was, why didn't I learn this sooner? Why didn't I have this language when I was in high school and middle school? Like when I was having these really bad experiences, why didn't I know how to talk about them, how to advocate for myself? So it was really empowering in that sense that it was like, I felt like I had a new super, hero sort of thing going on. That's really what also sparked the work that I do. It was this idea that we're not talking about these issues. We're not talking about the history. We're not making these connections from point A to B to C. Like we're not talking about the things that are happening right in front of us. So anyway, just to say that it was a really big pivotal moment for me in my own learning and healing and self-education. As much as my mom tried to talk to me about a lot of this stuff, she also didn't have all the language that I think she would have probably benefited from having earlier in her life too. So I remember thinking, how do I teach other people this stuff? And I had found this organization, and I was in Santa Barbara at the time.
Yeah.
And I found this organization that was teaching high school students it was essentially like anti-racism work. And the students would come up with solutions for their schools, and then they would present it back to their school administration. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. How do I get in? This is what I want to do. I needed this.
Yeah.
And I engaged in that organization for a long time. I started facilitating those spaces and those conversations and learning a lot about how to have those conversations. And that was sort of my introduction into what it could look like to do this for work. I had no idea that there were people out there making careers out of this. I was just in it because I felt like it was so important. It was so critical. And it still is. It opened just so much opportunity for me in terms of what I thought I could be capable of at that time.
That's awesome. And so tell us about, that sparked the love or the passion, curiosity for this work. Tell us, what happened next, and then lead us into the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. What did happen next? So I worked with that organization for a long time, and then I actually transitioned to doing work with another organization doing sex ed work for youth. They were really recognizing or realizing that their sex ed programs were very much geared toward white communities, white families, when there were a lot of young people of different cultures and backgrounds who also needed access to this education. So they brought me in to do sort of the anti-racism work around that and to diversify the work and to make it more inclusive. And I worked with that for 4 years, I think. I was on their board for a little bit after. I stayed engaged with a lot of these organizations after I left, too. And then I decided I wanted to do my own thing. I was like, all right, I have some experience. I know there's a lot of organizations who need this help. So I started my own consultancy. Not the same thing I have now. It was called something totally different. But I did that work throughout Ventura County, which is where I was living at that time.
Yeah.
And do that for a while. Then the pandemic hit, and I decided to go for a job at Planned Parenthood Los Angeles. It was Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, because after the murder of George Floyd, we saw a lot of these roles pop up. And it was actually sort of then where we really saw this term DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, really kind of bubble to the surface to describe this work. And, unfortunately now it's sort of the term is being sort of co-opted and weaponized, but that's when we really saw it come. So I started sort of my more formal professional DEI work then, and served as the director there for a few years, and was the inaugural director of DEI LA Family Housing, which was homelessness services and really housing folks off the street in LA, which is obviously a very critical issue here.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that was sort of the professional trajectory, but I think it had also occurred to me at multiple points, even just working in-house in organizations, that you can only do as much as the people at the top are willing to acknowledge and recognize, right?
Yes.
And so there were a lot of limitations for me working in organizations where I felt like I had these big visions and big dreams, but no one was ready to get there with me. And so that was hard, right? That was really hard for me. And so I decided I wanted, once again, to start my own thing. Last January, it's only been, almost a year, I decided I wanted to start my own business. I wanted to start the Inclusion School, is what I ended up calling it. And I really wanted, again, to really center this idea of teaching and guiding and being in community with people to do this work, as opposed to me being the all-knowing expert. I really wanted everyone to have a sense of their own expertise and their lived experiences, and how we leverage all of that to create communities where we do feel like we belong. And it really occurred to me so many times, continues to occur to me over and over, that real healing happens when we do feel like we belong and we feel like we're in community with people, and all of the things that make us joyful, like laughing with the people we love, feeling like we trust people, feeling connected, those are very important to the human experience. So I felt like those were really key aspects that we don't look at enough when we're doing this work. And I really wanted to center those pieces in the work that I do. From that whole journey, and I gave you a very brief description of the journey. Whole journey, I sort of have landed here where I'm really trying to center this really sort of human experience in what we call DEI work.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. You just, you had the passion and you went for it. That's so important. I do want to just really quick, I would love to at some point have a conversation on the anti-racism work you did with Planned Parenthood, maybe a separate episode but more also too around, the anti-racism work in teenage sexuality, or in the teachings of sexuality. I think that's a whole episode right there on its own. That would be great to have a conversation at some point about that. Yeah. Absolutely. But, you're doing your work right now. What has surprised you right now in the early stages of getting your work off the ground? What has been your biggest surprise, you think? I think my biggest surprise has been, and when I say it out loud, I know it's going to sound maybe to those listening and to myself even like, duh, of course. But for me, I had very little expectation when I started my business. It was very much about the vision and not so much about the outcome. But I think what surprised me was just the amount of people, organizations who really do want to do this work. I think there's always been a sense that this is very challenging, that people aren't ready to look outside of themselves to really do this in a sustainable way. But I've been really surprised by the types of organizations that have been interested in this work, and just how far I think this can go, and how important I think it always will be, no matter what we call it. So those have been some of the biggest sort of realizations I've had. It's like, there are a lot of people who want this, even if they're not talking about it. Yeah, that's great. And how do you, what is a couple of factors on really getting allies, which are, in our company, we have X amount of people, the business resource groups are this small, and then there's still this huge population of individuals who would probably be considered allies to these groups that they think that they have to identify with, but they really don't. What is like some of the things that you use in the work that you do to bring allies in, to pull allies in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially about the messaging around allyship. A couple of things I always emphasize with people who do want to engage in allyship, but maybe are nervous to or don't know how. And hopefully those are the only two groups I deal with. There are also the groups of people who don't want to, and that's a whole different issue. But for folks who do, I think there's a reframing that needs to happen. It's not so much like you do these set of things and you become an ally, but it's something you integrate in your life practice. It's something you continuously do and grow in. And I think the second thing is that we sort of have to reframe this idea of like allyship is people helping other people when it's really about solidarity. It's not like we're going out there in our allyship and like we're saving someone, like we're not there to be a savior, right? But allies are really there to be in solidarity, to be the body in between, to be the voice in between. And so I think it takes a lot of work around what it means to be courageous, what it means to give grace to each other, to make mistakes in honest ways, and to grow from those things. So, I think there's a lot of shifting that has to happen for people to really step into what allyship looks like in real time, as opposed to this idea that it's like a destination you get to, like you read a book and you're an ally, so I don't need to be part of this group because I already do the thing. Like I don't need any more education.
Yeah.
But I think about it for me in terms of, as a parent, I'm always seeking information about how to be a better parent. There's no destination for me. I'm never going to be done. So it's about how do I do the best that I can given the information I have and continue growing in that. And I think allyship requires the same kind of commitment. So it's a commitment people need to make, but it's also a practice as opposed to something we complete or do as like a project.
Yeah, it's an action word, right?
Yeah.
That was awesome. I was going to ask you this a little bit earlier. I think I'll just pop it in right now, is that do you feel that any part of your journey, at any part of your journey, there has been a struggle psychologically to say, I'm relating more to the Black side of my family versus the Hispanic Latinx side of my family, or, or shame or other around that? Or is there something that you found that works for you that you could share if somebody feels like they might be struggling being multiracial, but maybe not giving as much attention to one side or the other?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I've shared that I grew up mostly with my mother, so a lot of my identity has been being a Black mixed race person. Like I very much have always identified as being Black. But I think some of the struggles I've come up against, especially as I've gotten older and wanted to engage in my Blackness and what that looks like for me, I think there have been some barriers for me that some have been painful, some have been really important for me to learn from. But I think for folks who are living in that in-between space or who are really trying to hold different identities at the same time, I know for me, it's been really important to always be mindful of how I do present, especially when I'm in Black communities, because a lot of folks don't know that I'm Black, as I learned in middle school.
Yeah.
So knowing, I don't want to say my place, but just knowing what my privilege might look like in comparison to other people and how to hold that. And there's no one right answer to that. That is certainly a journey I'll continue being on. And I think too, when it comes to feeling a sense of fracturing on my dad's Argentinian side, I've had a lot of conversations with myself about, like you don't have to meet all these expectations to identify with something. Like this is who you are. Like you have these memories, you have these these interests, these desires that all kind of stem from that part of you too. Even if it's not as strong, it's still just as important if I want it to be. And so I think what it really comes down to is that no one gets to identify us for us, right? Like we always are, we have the agency to be in charge of how we identify and to be the person to name that and share that with others. And then anybody who's trying to tell you who you are is not somebody who wants to know you or see you or be connected to you in a genuine way. So I think a lot of the conversations I have with myself are, you get to be who you are and you get to choose how you identify, and nobody gets to choose that for you. And our identities often, when you're mixed, they shift over time and they ebb and they flow, and we find different parts of ourselves within it all. So, it's not as Black and white as I think we might want to make it for ease.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a lot of gray area, and I think we just learn how to swim in it.
So that was a really awesome answer. This hour went by so quick. I have two more questions.
That's fine.
One of them is one that I'm just really curious about. If you could share, like, what is the importance, or what are you finding is necessary or needed in the DEI space to bring the multiracial individuals in closer to feel like they're belonging, getting representation? What have you found that is working for you in your work in that space?
Well, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is like, we actually have to have diverse spaces in order to get there. When I think about like the leadership roles I've held, where I've often been maybe the only or one of the only people of color at my level in the organization, we just don't even have diverse voices at that point. So I think there has to be an intention even to create that sense of diversity, and not in like a surface level way where we're just hiring someone because we want to fill a quote, our personal quota, or whatever it is. But with the real intention of, I really recognize I need to learn from a variety of perspectives and backgrounds. So I'm going to be intentional about creating that space for myself or for my team or for my organization. So I think it's about getting folks together in that way. But then beyond that, it's how are we planning on really listening to those voices? Do we really care what they have to say? If they share an experience, are we going to change something we do, a process or an idea based on what they say? We have to be really honest with ourselves. And I find that a lot of people struggle with that. I find that there's a lot of people, typically, I'll say white folks, who are in leadership roles who want to say, because it feels good and it sounds good, to say, yes, of course I want a diverse leadership team. Of course I want to have, a Black woman at the table. But they've already made up their mind about what they're going to do or what they're not going to do or what they're going to hear or what they're not going to hear. So it really takes a sense of like being honest with yourself about that. And I think that's a really hard challenge to overcome. Even me as a leader in this space, that's a big challenge for me in my work, is how we help people really face themselves and, kind of look at themselves in the mirror to say, what is your real intention here? What is the outcome you actually want? Or is this just something you're doing because it feels good and looks good? So
do you feel like you when somebody says this is the outcome and it's not something that's kind of like honest and truthful work to get to a point of where people really feel like they're included and belong? Is that something that when you're talking to companies like that, if they say, well, we're trying to meet X quota or X numbers, is that something that you might actually say, well, you know what, I'm doing this work that is looking to create this type of culture, and I don't know if we really match up?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is not my work. That is not the work that I'm not. I do not wish to be hired to help you fill a quota. I'm here to help you actually create the kind of community that's going to help this work move forward. It's going to help the workplace thrive. And there's no quota system that helps the workplace thrive on multiple levels. So, I mean, I stand very strong with what I do, and I believe in what I do so much that I would not be swayed to do something that wouldn't feel right to me.
Wavering, you have an unwavering North Star to justice, ever since you were young. It's awesome. I ask everyone, what's your recipe for world peace? We're entering an interesting time in our world, at least in the United States. But what is your recipe for world peace?
Yes, great question. Not that I'm here to solve, world peace by any means, but I do actually feel, it might be a little cliche and potentially, especially in this space, but I actually really feel that we need a multicultural world to achieve world peace. And I say that because while there are people like me, there's people like you, there's lots of people who are multiracial, multi-ethnic, we're not all always together in the same spaces or in change-making spaces or decision-making spaces. And I think we do need that variety of perspective. All of the different aspects of who we are coming together. It is really hard when that's not the case. For example, a lot of the schools in Los Angeles are predominantly Hispanic Latino, which is fine. Nothing inherently wrong with that. But I will often find that in all white communities, they'll say, oh, those diverse schools in LA. And I'm like, not diverse. They just have people of color. So it's like it's being really intentional about how we define what multiculturalism looks like and what it actually means to have lots of different people in one space together. There's nothing inherently bad about having, groups where we find ourselves and find our own community. That has a role and it's important. But I think we benefit so much from being in spaces where we are very open to learning from other people and changing our process, changing our thoughts, changing our beliefs because we've learned something from somebody else. And I think that especially benefits those who fit into the dominant culture and who never have to think about those things and never have to question their processes. Yeah. So I think it's really important. And I think that would be my recipe for world peace, to really create spaces where we are all together and are all engaging and learning from each other from a very early age, and that becomes our norm. So. Yeah,
I love that. We're going through a shift in my work, and they're thinking about shifting around affinity groups to bring in, like, how can we identify other groups to get to what you just explained. And I was at first kind of against that, going, I don't want these other voices that have always been there suppressed to be lost, but they've listened somewhat to us, and it sounds like there is an opportunity. But I like what you said, because it makes me feel like, I'm a little bit more, I'm more open-minded now, just having this conversation from what you just said about, this could be a huge benefit to get us all together and have conversations and learn from each other, versus it is still somewhat segregated when you create affinity groups that are, I'm going to go find my people over here in the Latinx BRG,
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, work. I know we're almost out of time. Where can people find you? And I will let you go.
Yeah, so people can find me on Instagram at Official Inclusion School. That is my handle. And I am also on LinkedIn under my name, Chiany Dri, and I'm always able to be found there. And we have a website, theinclusionschool.com. So those are the three major places you can find me and my work and engage with us. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, awesome. You have so much information, lived experience, that I know that I could go another hour. I will share this also on our site. And thank you. Thank you so much for making time today. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it too. This has been so much fun for me. So thank you.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of the Multiracialverse podcast is brought to you by Eviton Couture, a brand born from a powerful vision and a deep connection to heritage. Founded by Shinnecock brothers Jason Tech King and Wayon Moon Smith, Eviton represents resilience and pride. From handmade tie-dye to wellness-focused athletic wear, each piece is crafted with intention and positivity, smudged with sage for good vibes, and delivered to you with love. Join the Eviton family on their journey of empowerment and inspiration. Hit up Moon on Instagram at Eviton_KS. That is native spelled backwards _KS to view product and place an order. Eviton Couture. Feel the spirit of resilience in every stitch. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Huge shout out to my friend Johannes Skoda for mixing and creating the intro music, and DJ Kazam for the track.